Good afternoon, everybody. Great Tuesday to you all, and welcome to this edition of the Seth Joyner Show. Listen, we've got a lot going on today. Obviously, the news with Tiger Woods being the big golf fan that I am. I'm going to ask my panel to weigh in, but there's so much information to get to. We're literally 1 week removed from Carson Wentz being traded to the Indianapolis Colts. We'll get into that. We'll get into Nick Sirianni. We'll get into, what the Eagles will potentially do when it comes to the number 6 pick overall. I got a full panel for you guys today. First of all, my co-worker at NBC Sports Philly, pre and post game. You guys know him as the godfather of sports in all of Philadelphia, my good friend Ray Didinger. Ray, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Seth. Always great to be with you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you joining me. My other co-host at NBC Sports Philly, played with the Philadelphia Eagles. You guys know the big guys, Mr. Barrett Brooks. Barrett, how you doing, my friend?
Good. What's going on, man?
All good. And then this gentleman, my first time on my show. I'm glad to have him on. You guys know him from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I love his articles, love his opinionated approach. Mr. Jeff McClain is joining us today. Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, Seth. Thanks for having me.
And somewhere along the way, I think Derek Gunn is going to join us. I don't know. He says he'll give us about 30 minutes today, so I'm not sure whether that's the first 30 minutes or the second 30 minutes, gentlemen. But let's get this thing rolling. You know, news comes out today. Tiger Woods has a car accident in California, multiple leg injuries. Not very clear as to, what precipitated it. But, for the most part, we're talking about a single car accident. He was taken to the hospital. Jaws of Life had to get him out of the car. Ray, your thoughts on it, because it's dominating the news today.
Not surprising. Tiger Woods is a huge figure. You don't have to be a golf fan to know who Tiger Woods is and care about Tiger Woods. I covered a fair amount of golf back when I was still in the newspaper business, and I saw some great players because I covered the game in the 70s. I covered Nicklaus at his peak, and Arnold Palmer was still competitive, and Johnny Miller and Tom Watson came along, some great players. But I never saw anybody dominate the game when he was at his peak the way Tiger dominated when he was at his best. To see what he did to Augusta National that 1 year. I walked Augusta National with Jack Nicklaus more than once, and I didn't think anybody could play that course the way Jack did. And Tiger, when Tiger was Tiger, he made it look like a chip and putt course. So it looks like it's kind of a shame because that was the great question. Would he pass Nicklaus with 18 majors? Would he break Jack's record? And boy, at one point it looked like it was an absolute slam dunk. And now, sadly, I don't think we'll ever see that happen.
Well, Jeff, you live in that world of reporting. Give us your thoughts on the Tiger Woods coincidence today.
Yeah, and I also kind of live in the golf world. I'm like you, Seth. I'm a big fan of the game. I play it myself. So and I kind of grew up with Tiger Woods. He's my generation, and he was a hero to a lot of golf fans of my generation. So to see this happen to him, and to see actually, honestly, the last decade or so of how, as Ray mentioned, maybe the best golfer of all time, certainly in the top 3 or 4, and to see what had happened, ever since, obviously, we all know about the domestic issues that he had, but also the back problems that have just really plagued his career. And for years, he didn't even know if he's going to be able to play golf again, be able to pick up a club again and go out there and swing. And finally just had, I think maybe it was like at a breaking point, and he had this one last procedure, and it just kind of slowly but surely he was able to get back into it. And to see him to win at the Masters 2 years ago was, to a lot of people, something they never thought that they'd ever see happen again. And for him to go out there and to win that 15th major was, it took a lot out of him because we haven't seen him come close to competing in a major since then. But it was such a highlight, I think, for many people. And, let's be honest here, Tiger hasn't been the cuddliest of professional athletes and golfers, but everyone's always been so much in awe of him. And to see him to go out there and come back, I think meant a lot to a lot of people. And then to see him obviously coming off the 18th green and hugging his son and his daughter, just like his father had done to him over 20 years prior, was meant a lot to people of my generation, I thought. And now another setback, and we don't know the exact extent of the injuries to his legs, but geez, I just got to think that this is going to make it even more harder for him to come back and then to again compete. And as you mentioned, right, to someday eclipse Jack Nicklaus in those 18 majors.
Absolutely. Now, Barrett, I know that, you recently got into the game of golf. Our paths cross at different tournaments, throughout the year. No doubt, even though you're younger than me, you grew up in the Tiger Woods age. Any thoughts from you?
Just coming from an athletic standpoint and what it is to be an athlete, just being a professional golfer by itself, and then to think what your body has to go through as far as, what your back and the strain you put on your back, just practicing every day. I can understand, how things, went in the wrong direction, especially with the meds we had to take. You can remember going and they just gave you the little white packets and then send you out, with all the medicine. And half the time we didn't even ask what it was. But, he went through a lot, with his body. And this can help his career go in any direction, but, either stay level or go down. I'm feeling for him right now. Just the fact that, as an athlete, you never want to see something like this happen to a guy that's, probably one of the, or if not the biggest golf sensation in the past 10, 20 years, So, my heart goes out to him. Hope things are not as bad as what, we're projecting them to be, especially when you have to get taken out by the jaws of life. I hope, things, pan out well for him.
Well, we're going to add the fifth wheel to this cog. My good friend and colleague, Derek Gunn. Derek,
I'm glad he's your friend.
How you guys doing? How you doing? Yeah, whatever.
Hey, listen, D. We were just, giving our opinions and our expressions and our prayers, to the Tiger Woods situation. Before we get on into the football deal, I want to give you an opportunity, to kind of speak on Tiger Woods and his situation, what's going on with him today.
Well, he's such an iconic figure. And throughout his career, he has become like a Pied Piper. Even non-golf fans know who Tiger Woods is. Even non-golf fans will watch a tournament, if nothing more, the final 18 holes of a tournament, if Tiger Woods is involved in it, because of what he has stood for as a professional athlete for so long. And then you look at the trials and the tribulations he's had to go through in his career, with his marriage, with his back injuries and things like this. And, I tell you what, you talk about a guy who has ridden the zenith of success and has fallen to the lowest of lows in a lot of ways. And when you hear about a guy in a crash of this magnitude, first and foremost, you start having flashbacks to Kobe Bryant and what he might have gone through. And you find out that he's okay, but he's in surgery. So, like a lot of people, my thoughts and prayers are out there with Tiger Woods and his loved ones. And if he is having surgery on both legs, I have not seen the latest report, but I would be shocked if he's going to be back anytime soon, if at all this year, playing, 36 holes of golf, 72 holes of golf, and trying to be as competitive as we know that he's capable of being.
Well, you guys are watching the Seth Joyner Show. My special guest today is Ray Dittinger, Barrett Brooks, Derek Gunn, and Jeff McClain. Fellas, let's jump into the biggest Eagles news of this early offseason. Last week, the Philadelphia Eagles trade one Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts for a third rounder in this year's draft and a conditional number 2 in 2022 that can, if he meets the percentages of playing time, can translate into another number 1, which in all probability, my only guess is that, only thing that'll stop him from meeting those percentages is probably and injury. But thoughts by each one of you guys on the trade, and then let's follow up roundtable again on what do you think about what the Eagles got in return. Jeff McClain, I'll start with you.
Well, I think that the trade, obviously, at a certain point was inevitable. Once it was reported that Howie was fielding calls, that meant that they were open to trading him. And once you're open to trading a quarterback and you allow that to get out there, he's all but gone. And what we saw was there really being only one team seriously involved. I think the Bears would have gotten more involved had Carson expressed the desire to play there, but the Colts was always the likely place, obviously because of Frank Reich. I think because of the type of players that he would have around him in terms of their offensive line and the skill position players, that you had stability there with Frank coming off another playoff appearance. Chris Ballard's considered one of the better GMs. And I think the Midwestern appeal, there was an appeal for a team in the Midwest near where Carson obviously grew up in North Dakota, and playing for perhaps a smaller market team where maybe you just aren't under the microscope as much as you are here in sports crazed Philadelphia. And, there's been varying reports of whether Carson, demanded a trade or not. Well, he did essentially. I mean, when you say that you're not happy and you want to play elsewhere, you're essentially asking the team to trade you. And when you're a quarterback and you have that much money invested in you, you can basically dictate where you want to go. And that's what Carson did. And, the Eagles, I think, also maybe had to be talked into it a little bit. But I think from their perspective, they looked at it and they thought, okay, financially, what makes the most sense for us? They are going to be able to save a fair amount this year. And then now they had nothing on the books beyond 2021 in terms of Carson Wentz's contract. And you looked at the situation that was very much of their own creation. But that said, quarterback controversy, if Carson came back, and even if you did give him the job, how would that go over in the locker room? How would that play out as practices were being conducted? What if you did have an open competition? Let's say Carson did win it in training camp. First game, let's say he struggles in the first half. What happens that probably going to see a full or close to full Lincoln Financial Field this coming season? What happens then? Is that something that you want for your franchise? And certainly I think that was something that Carson looked at and just didn't feel it. There are a lot of other reasons, I think, for Carson wanting to leave, starting with the front office and how they handled that Jalen Hurts pick. Obviously, some other decisions that Howie Roseman had made over the years, I think that made, from what I understand, that made Carson lose trust in the organization. So, I think I don't think this was a foregone conclusion when Carson was benched in December. Once we heard that he was not happy and didn't want to come back and compete and maybe wanted to be traded, I felt like this was maybe where we were going to end up, and certainly this is where we are now.
Well, Derek, I'm going to save Ray and Barrett for last because, we argued incessantly, throughout the year about the fact that, Carson could potentially be moving on. The Eagles really didn't get a lot in return. And I think in some ways, in my opinion, you can attribute that to the fact that, he didn't say much. And in Jeffrey Lurie's press conference, he called him an asset. So you pretty much put it out there that, hey, he's a talent that we want to try to, build back up and resuscitate. But when he added a asset to that all automatically said to me that there's a potential here that he's no longer with this organization.
I put myself in Chris Ballard's situation. As a GM, you have to sell to an owner. Why would you want Carson Wentz over, let's say, a Deshaun Watson? Why would we make this type of investment in a Carson Wentz over Deshaun Watson, especially with all the negativity that has been filtering out there against him in recent months? All these teams talk about changing locker room culture and bringing in the right people. Doug Peterson was a big proponent of bringing in the right people and locker room culture and things like this. Do I want a guy who completed 58% of his passes, who is damaged goods and has been damaged goods for years? Do we think we can make him a reclamation project and get him back close to what he was in 2017. That's a big sell when you're trying to sell that to an owner, because if this fails, no matter what you give up for him, it could cost you your job somewhere down the road. Now, I do believe that with Carson being back with Frank Wright, a fresh environment, a fresh approach, I'm assuming an offense similar to what made Carson successful in 2017 is in store for him. Where Howie Roseman is concerned, you have to try to save face. I mean, everybody on the outside looking in knew they were not going to get anything close to what the Rams got for Jared Goff. Even though I believe Carson Wentz is a better athlete than Jared Goff. But because of the circumstances, you knew that wasn't going to happen. So you have one GM who has to save face and get something that's appealing and something that could help this team in the immediate future instead of the long-term future. And another guy's got to sell his boss on why we should bring this particular guy in a quarterback-starved environment. So those are two tough situations to be in. But if what we have heard about Carson Wentz is true here, about the friction with the head coach, disrespecting the head coach, hadn't talked in a couple of months, changing plays at the line of scrimmage, then I've got to get this guy out of here, because I don't want my younger players looking up to the face of the franchise if that's what he's going to be like. And, of course, we don't know what kind of coach Nick Sirianni is. We don't know what kind of authoritative figure he is in terms of getting in Carson's face and his coaching staff and being able to get him on page with what we're trying to do. So you have to alleviate that altogether, and that's exactly what the Eagles did.
Well, Ray, I'm going to come to you next because, you know, you're a huge Carson fan. You're a huge Carson guy. I need to set the record straight because I've been very critical of him throughout the season. You know, I felt like in week 3, watching his play, that there was something amiss, something was wrong. And I remember saying, you know, that the Eagles have a quarterback problem, and you guys all looked at me like I had, you know, a 15-pound boulder sitting on my head at the time. But I could see it. I could see that something was wrong, something was amiss with him. He's immensely talented, but there's so many questions, Ray, that surrounds this guy, and so many issues that surround him in a way that, you know, makes you scratch your head. Because, listen, he had Philadelphia, you know, wrapped around his finger. All he had to do was just go out and be the Carson Wentz of 2017 or the Carson Wentz of the last 5 games of 2019, and he's fine. Do you really believe that the psychology breakdown of having Jalen Hurts being picked at 53 and in the locker room really affected him that much? Could his relationship with Doug Peterson have been that fractured that the rumors that we continue to hear about him not talking to Doug for 8 to 10 weeks and him being upset with Doug and, you know, all of these things that go along, you know, with the speculation, because neither Carson nor the Philadelphia Eagles really said much throughout the year. So when you take those things into consideration, Carson's 28 years old. That's, you know, getting up there as far as, you know, when you're talking about NFL age. How does that follow him to Indianapolis? And, you know, what's the long-term perspective for him being in Indianapolis?
Well, I think if you look at whenever you have a trade, people try to assess a trade. They always say who, you know, which team won and which team lost. To me, the clear winner in this trade isn't either team. It's Carson Wentz. I mean, he's stepping into, and I think Jeff alluded to this, a really good situation there. First of all, he's reunited with a coach that he likes, a coach with whom he has already has a relationship and a large amount of trust. A coach who did a really good job of coaching him in the best year of his career. And other coaches there, you know, Press Taylor, Mike Rowe, other guys on staff that he knows. So he's got that, a very good offensive line. The left tackle's moving on, but he can be replaced. A really good running game. And to me, a top 5 defense. So I think he's stepping into a really, really good situation there. I mean, so there's a playoff team this year. The quarterback leaves, he steps right in. I think it's a great situation for him. I know you alluded to the fact that we differed on the post-game show about the Carson Wentz and the fate of Carson Wentz. And I felt right to the very end, and I mean the bitter end after the Washington game, final week of the season. And I really didn't, for two reasons. Number one, I've always been of the belief that in pro football especially, you don't give up on talent. And I know he had a terrible year. Statistically, you look at the numbers, you know he had a terrible year. But at 28, I still see him as a major talent. Needs to be rebuilt, but the talent to me is still there. That's number one. Number two is I just thought that the money factor was just so enormous. I mean, that cap hit was just so enormous, the largest in the history of salary caps, that I just said, yeah, now they just can't do this. Just from a bookkeeping standpoint, they can't do this. So I really thought he was going to come back. But what I didn't know, and I don't know that any of us really knew it fully, was how much he wanted out. I mean, he was unhappy about the Hurts pick. We kind of all got that. He was unhappy about being benched. We certainly all got that. But the idea that it had reached a point where he said, I don't want to be here anymore. I can't deal with the coach. I can't deal with the management. I want to get out. I want to get away from all this. I want a fresh start somewhere else. The fact that it had reached that point where it had been so severed and so broken, I certainly didn't feel that. And I kind of thought they'll work this out in the offseason. They don't want to be on the hook for all that money. They recognize that this guy can still be rebuilt. I think they're going to give him another chance. And I totally misread that one. I mean, Seth, you kind of felt it coming more than I did. I just didn't think it was going to happen. But it was obvious then, once we got past the end of the season and more of these stories started to build. And I got to give Jeff a lot of credit. I mean, he was on top of it all the way. The more you read and the more you knew what was out there, I finally came around to saying, you know what? You know, you've gone so far down the road with this guy, there's no going back. And so now, here we are. Carson Wentz gets a fresh start in Indianapolis with a good team, and the Eagles are starting over basically with Jalen Hurts.
Hey, listen, Ray, this is the reason why I've got this all-star lineup today, because, the fans want to hear this. Barrett, now, I pulled up a quote from you. You were on The Fanatic, and you said this is a historically bad trade simply because there's not much dead cap money, simply because there has not been this much dead cap money. I apologize. From one player ever. Considering where the Philadelphia Eagles are, what Jeffrey Lurie has deemed the transitional phase that this football team is in right now, we already knew that they were almost in cap hell to begin with. Do you make these decisions just based upon the money, or do you realize that, hey, this is a throwaway year for us, and that we'll just go ahead and take the $34 million cap hit this year, at the expense of trying to build for the future, and all the things that swirled and went on with Carson, all the insinuations. I like to say that where there's smoke, there's certainly fire. If there's a rumor that comes out about someone and it only surfaces once, then I can live with it being a rumor. But when you continuously, time after time after time again, you start hearing these things that begin to leak out, because we all know the two people you don't screw with on a football team is you don't screw with the head coach and you don't screw with the quarterback. So yeah, these things are going to be anonymous. But when they continue to resurface and you're talking about all of these different things, from selfishness to uncoachability to, not being a great teammate, the lack of leadership, all of these things that go along with the narrative that's been painted about Carson Wentz, this is a move that you have to make, because you have to believe that there's some validity to some of it. Maybe not all of it, but some of it.
You're absolutely right on that. And I'm gonna tell the truth, man. Just from 11 o'clock on the day that he was traded and it was finalized that he got traded, I was a firm believer in thinking, no, there's no way that they can trade Carson Wentz and take that much of a dead cap hit. We're talking about almost $34 million in dead cap space that they're going to have. And it's not just his dead cap space. You also have to look at the others that are going to do it. You got D. Jack's going to be gone. Alshon is going to be gone. at this point, they don't even know if they can sign back Derek Barnett because it'll be a $10 million cap hit for him. I mean, they're going to be right around $70 million in dead cap space. How do you feel a team with only $110 million, $120 million? I mean, it's going to be tough for them to do that. And right now, they're still like, what, 50, 60 million over the cap. So I just didn't think it could happen, number one, because of that. Number two, because we have an owner that really thinks a lot on how people view him. You know, his big thing was the gold standard. I love Jeffrey Lurie, and he had built this team to the gold standard. This should be a popular destination point for free agents to come in because they knew that, number one, they were going to compete in the division, and number two, the culture inside that locker room would deem that you would want to come play for the head coach. Well, all that changed and started going in that direction. I didn't want to believe it because the money situation, you know, the NFL is run by, you know, money. It's $1 billion corporation. Say what you want to say. It always affects even talent as far as keeping guys or letting guys go. But the simple fact that it was that much money and they you know, Carson is still a player that, you know, you could get him back going again. You could coach him back. All he needed to do was listen. You know, at the end of the day, he figured out, all right, I can't self-correct. There's no way he would have came back, even if he was here in Philadelphia and played as bad as he played this last year. Because number one, he's a prideful guy. Number two, he has to understand that he has to listen to get himself better and playing better. So I just figured if there's no way that he could go, but hey, I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And they got beat up on the deal. I mean, a 3rd-round pick for a franchise quarterback and a conditional 2nd-round pick, I still think we were the worst loser. We got egg on our face. The Eagles organization right now is a laughingstock in the league because of, you know, this trade. And as they go forward, all Carson has to do is throw for it. You know, I was thinking if he was the Eagle, if he threw 3 or 4 300-yard games to start the season off, it'd be water under the bridge. But they just couldn't handle it. So at this point, you know, he's gone now, and I still can't believe, I'm still dumbfounded that this team has that much dead cap money that they're not going to be able to use, and they're going to try to field a team with the rookie head coach and all this lack of talent that they have. It's going to be tough for this Eagles this year.
I'm going to come back to some of that, but Jeff, I'm curious to know, because you're close enough to it, that Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman make a massive mistake by not, you know, taking the stance that the Houston Texans have taken as far as Deshaun Watson is concerned. And I say that because if they would have just came out and said, hey, we're not trading, even if they had the conversation behind the scenes with Carson, you know, they could have just said, you know what, we're not moving him. He's you know, there's nothing going on. Okay. You do that, in my opinion, to create the market for him. But when you don't say anything, that's just like saying, yeah, we're going to trade him, you know. So now the value of Carson Wentz begins to go down substantially. That's just one piece of it, because I believe that, you know, the injuries, only being able to complete 2 seasons out of 5, and then the abhorrent season he had last year put him in a situation where he really had no true value left. But I also think that Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie made a massive mistake by not saying anything and letting the rest of the NFL believe that Carson was actually on the trading blocks, you know, before they had to do so.
Well, you never want to trade a player when he's at its lowest value, and that's essentially what's happened with Carson Wentz. So it was good, like you just mentioned. I mean, it was going to be hard to move him based upon how he performed in 2020. I mean, you just had to look at the film. I talked to a lot of evaluators, NFL GMs, and teams that were possibly in the market for a quarterback, and they just said, looking at the film, they don't want him. And obviously on top of that, the contract situation, et cetera, and then everything we've heard, that a lot of it that I've reported about his uncoachability played into their not being, you know, in the market for a guy like Carson Wentz. You know, Jeff, I think they tried a little bit. Jeff was the kind of little wishy-washy on Carson when he was asked about him. You mentioned Seth when he said he called him an asset. I thought that was kind of downplaying him a little bit. Earlier, he kind of propped him up a little bit. How he called him like 5 fingers on your hand, and kind of it was kind of a corny way of saying how important Carson was to the team. But what he was selling, I think a lot of people weren't buying. And I thought maybe at the time they thought there was a chance they could keep Carson Wentz. But even after the Nick Sirianni hire, he was still resolute in wanting to leave, and especially after Phillip Rivers had announced that he was retiring, they could, he knew that the Colts is a team that he could go to, and obviously his agent had already been shopping him to a team. So this was something the Eagles knew that was potential to happen. The Deshaun Watson thing. I mean, look, there's still time for him to be traded. I'm still not ruling that out because I think, again, he has muscle. He's got a no trade clause. He can kind of force his way out of there if he really wants to. And I think with the Texans, they're not really in a hurry because they have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. They can move him anytime they want because there's going to be tons of teams that are going to be interested in him. With Carson, they had to move quickly because, again, there weren't many teams interested. And I want to just jump back a little bit to just this whole perception of Carson. And first of all, there have been reports, an ESPN report about, him and Doug not talking for 10 weeks. And from what I understand, that's not true. And I had reported in January that, look, their communication hadn't been great, and it hadn't been great for a couple of years. They always used to meet on Thursday nights during the season, talk for about an hour, unrelated to football a lot of times. And they increasingly got away from that. But this season, obviously, the pandemic played a role in the fact that it was very hard for guys to kind of be around each other and get to know each other because you had all these Zoom calls, et cetera. So that played a part in it. But they weren't talking as much, obviously, this year. There were install meetings that maybe they were a part of, but the conversations were basically relegated to just strictly almost on the field. Now, after he was benched, they stopped talking. There were a few text messages, but from what I understand, so basically the last month was when they weren't talking. Look, that's not good at all. This is all not great, but I think some of that had been exaggerated a little bit. I just want to clarify that for you guys.
Got you. Derek, how do you feel about Carson Wentz not making a statement until his farewell, post to Philly? I'm just out there. That's just me. If someone's saying something about me that's not necessarily true, and I have the venue to set it right, then I'm going to step forward and I'm going to give my opinion about what's going on and tell the truth about what's really going on. But there's been so many things, over the last, 4 weeks of the season leading up to this point that has been said about Carson. And he said nothing. There was no statement. There was a lot of things that were leaked out in week 17 and week 16 and week 17 that I thought was detrimental to the team. And you just knew that it came from his people because they always seem to come out on Sunday morning right before the game. Mm-hmm. But when everyone's got an opinion about what's going on with you and everyone's making these assumptions on a national level, for him to remain silent, that just blew me away. And then the only time that we hear from him is when he's saying goodbye, Phil. It's been great playing for you guys, blah, 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 blah. I mean, that just rubbed me the completely wrong way.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think his silence spoke volumes. This was a guy, like many athletes do, because of social media, the social media world we live in right now. He had no problem speaking endlessly about his AO1 Foundation on his Twitter and Instagram accounts, about his hunting excursions, about his new family, his expanded family with the new baby and everything. But the fact that he never came out and said anything, whether a statement released through the Philadelphia Eagles or him taking the onus upon himself and coming out and saying something, whether it's what you're hearing out here is not true, I want to remain part of Philadelphia, I love the city, I love the culture. The fact that he said absolutely nothing to defend himself or squash any of these rumors spoke volumes in terms of just how much he wanted to get out of here, because he could have made the PR staff do it for him. He could have done it himself, but he chose to take the silent route. So the more he let that sit out there, the more the fan base built believing that Carson Wentz wanted out of here. And so obviously, as Jeff talked about, you had so many rumors out here and things like this about what was going on behind the scenes. But I think it just got to a point with Carson, as you guys have already talked about. Number one, he obviously had to be upset with the Jalen Hurts drafting. Number two, Carson probably has never had teammates speak anonymously against him. People stand against him. I mean, let's face it, this guy was a golden boy, high school, college. He had the world by the you-know-what. You know, he comes in as the number 2 draft pick in the National Football League, and automatically he's a Pied Piper of Philadelphia. He's the new savior of this organization. And he was riding that holy grail for several years, and then all of a sudden things started to bottom out for him. And, you know, a lot of athletes can handle this city, this environment. You have to have a certain kind of thick skin to survive in this Philadelphia environment. And I think we've all been a part of this market enough to understand exactly what I'm talking about here. But the fact that Carson never tried to defend himself and left everything to the imagination, the more he allowed this to linger, the more I was convinced that this man was out of here in the worst way.
Well, guys, you're listening to the Seth Joyner Show. My guests today, Ray Didinger, Barrett Brooks, Derek Gunn, and Jeff McClain. You know what? He's no longer a Philadelphia Eagle. Let's move on. Let's talk about what this trade means for Jalen Hurts and what the Eagles do from here. Obviously, you know, you've got to create competition to keep, you know, Jalen motivated. I think he's a very motivated individual to begin with, but I think that they need to go out and they need to bring in a veteran guy who could provide mentorship, who could provide competition for Jalen Hurts. And, you know, after I give you guys an opportunity to, you know, touch on that, then I want to get into, you know, what do the Eagles do at number 6? Because I got my own opinion about, you know, what I believe that they should do. Ray, what does this move mean for Jalen? And I know that 3.5 games is only a small sample size. But in your opinion, have you seen enough that this young kid can be developed to be the next franchise quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles?
I need to see more. I mean, we got 4.5 games. I'm not even dealing with the cameo stuff early in the season, the one play here, the one play there. But we got 4.5 games at the end, and we saw some really good stuff. I mean, he was good against the Saints. He was good against Arizona, less so against Dallas, and that was a stinker against Washington. There's no getting around that. So we've seen some real promise, and we've seen a ton of rookie mistakes. I think the only thing I can say is, okay, let's see what the real Jalen is. We've seen the good, we've seen the bad. Let's see what the real guy is. Right now, I'm not prepared. I'm certainly not prepared to say, yep, he's it. He's the quarterback of the future. I haven't seen that. What he looks like on the field to me is kind of what I expected him to look like after seeing him in college. I was, you know, I'll be very honest about this. I was not in favor of the pick when they made it. I thought he was overdrafted in the 2nd round. I had him as a late 3. He's got a lot of athletic ability. He can certainly move. He can certainly be creative on the run. But I think he's a long ways away from being an NFL thrower in terms of just consistent, repetitive accuracy, which is what you have to be to win in the National Football League. I don't think he's there yet. He's gotten a lot better. The one thing I will say is he's gotten much better. He was much better. He was in Alabama. He was all over the place as a thrower. He was much better at Oklahoma, and I think you saw him grow. I think you saw him improve a little bit this year in the NFL. He seems to be trending in the right direction, which tells me he's working on his passing, which he has to do. But the idea that I think the Eagles have their answer, I think they've solved it. He's the quarterback moving forward. Maybe that'll be true, but I'm not prepared to say it just yet.
Got you. Well, Barrett, you know, I for one, when I look at Jalen Hurts, I think that, you know, the furnace that this guy has been through, you know, when you talk about, and I get it, because there's some people in the comments and there's people, you know, on social media that's going to say, oh, the college game ain't the NFL game. Okay. But you come from one to go to the other. So you got to prove yourself on one level to be able to succeed on the next. But you look at this kid, he wins a national championship. He's in the midst of winning the 2nd national championship. He's not getting anything done. He's replaced by Tua. Okay. The next year rolls around. They go into camp. They got an open competition. He gets beat out and he decides to stay. And, you know, I believe either in the SEC championship or in the national championship game, Tua gets hurt. He comes in and saves the day. And as a guy that's already graduated, in 2.5, 3 years, his senior year, he decides to leave and go to Oklahoma to up his draft stock. Now, he wasn't that great of a passer at Alabama. So one offseason, Lincoln Riley turned this guy into a prolific passer at the college level. And for you guys who don't believe it, just go look at the statistics. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but go look at the statistical year he put together. And then you got people that watched him play in a system that he was learning in on the fly, no OTAs, an abbreviated training camp, no preseason games. So literally this guy jumped from the college ranks to starting 4 games at the end of the season. And you got people that say, oh, he can't throw the ball. And I'm asking in my mind, I'm like, which game were you guys watching? Which passes did you not see him complete? So in my opinion, I think he has what it takes to raise point. He needs further development, but the cauldron that he's been in, the fire that he's been under throughout his career, his college career, I would say I wouldn't bet against this kid.
Just like you say, man, steel sharpens steel. He's been through it all. He's been benched. He's been in a situation where he's been on top of the mountaintop. He has done everything from the standpoint of being a competitor. And that's what you want at the quarterback position. You want a competitor, and that's just what Jalen Hurts is. Now, as far as his game, of course he can get better. He's a rookie. You make the greatest improvement from your rookie year to your second year in that offseason because you realize who you are and how you fit in the NFL. Well, he's going to get a jump on it this year. He's not going in as a backup. He's going in as a starter. Yes, they're going to bring somebody in to compete him. And I don't think they're going to bring in, they're going to draft somebody at the number 6 position, a quarterback. I think they should trade back. We'll get into that also. But Jalen Hurts is a fierce competitor. He wants to be great. And that want and that drive makes him a dangerous quarterback in this league because he can will his team and will the players around him to play at a higher level. And that's what you saw from the team last year. They were playing at a higher level due to his enthusiasm and his youthfulness wanting to play the game. Even the older players were playing at a higher level. And that's all you want from a quarterback, a guy that can motivate men. And he can definitely do that. As far as, his passing game, he'll learn how to read defenses. He'll learn how to go out there and get to his second or third read. But he also has that ability that he can use his legs, get out of trouble, and impact the defense with his speed. I mean, that sounds like some good work for me. That's some intangibles, that a lot of quarterbacks don't have. And you see this league is starting to transfer into those type of quarterbacks. They're having some success with them. So I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm gonna say, look, I want him to be a guy that's going to go out there, fight, motivate those guys, get them going in the right direction, and maybe then he wins a couple of games just from the sheer will of him being a competitor, number 1, and getting those guys enthusiastic in that locker room, number 2.
Jeff, what do the Eagles do with the number 6 pick overall? I'm of the opinion that you trade out of that spot. I just don't believe that, a wide receiver or quarterback makes you that much better at this point in time of a rebuild. And, people don't like to hear it, but in organizational speak, that's basically what Jeffrey Lurie said is that, we're in a rebuild right now.
Yeah.
You move out of that spot, in my opinion. You try to add as many picks as you can. And I get it. Howie's not done a great job of drafting, but I think that Howie Roseman is now on the accountability clock. He's got 2 to 3 years to get this right before Jeffrey Lurie pulls the plug on him. So in your opinion, what do the Eagles do with the number 6 overall pick?
Well, Howie's been there 21 years, and they've only had only one other top 10 pick, and that was in 2013, coming off the 2012 year, and there was no quarterback there, and it took Lane Johnson. But when you are that high, you have the number 6 pick, and you don't have a quarterback, let's say you don't believe that you have a quarterback that is going to be a quality starter, you have to take that option very seriously of taking a quarterback. You have to look at those guys and you have to evaluate every one of those guys. Look, I don't think they're going to be able to get Trevor Lawrence, but let's just say that you can, and he drops, you can move up, whatever. You evaluate all those guys, and if you have a guy there that you love, then you take him. And I understand that you have all these other needs, and this is a rebuild. But if you can get a quarterback that you believe can be your franchise quarterback for so how many years, you got to pull the trigger in my mind. Now, is they going to do that? I'm not entirely sure. They're kind of in a weird position here in that there isn't a bona fide stud tackle or defensive tackle that high. I think there are a couple good tackles out there. Typically, that's where the Eagles go in the first round, is they want to build from the lines. And, I don't know if that's going to be there at number 6, or at least when it gets to them. So that's when I think, Seth, the option that you have painted, maybe the one that they play, is that the trade back, because again, taking a tight end like Kyle Pitts, do you want to do that at number 5 when you have Dallas Goedert? Taking a wide receiver when obviously you do need a wide receiver, but do you want to take one that high? I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that they will seriously look at that number 6 pick and consider taking a quarterback.
Interesting. I hear what you're saying, but I think logistically, when you sit back and you think about it, okay, let's say that one of these quarterbacks fall to them at 6, and they make the decision to take that guy. Now, if you pick a guy that early, the cap implications for picking a guy that early, especially a quarterback, are tremendously higher than moving out of that spot. That's one consideration. The other consideration is, okay, you have a guy that's in the same position that Jalen Hurts was in this time last year. So now you're going to go to training camp with a first-year quarterback, a rookie quarterback, and probably a journeyman veteran. Okay, so let's just say that Jalen Hurts wins the starting job. Now you've got, a $5 or $6 million backup. You've got an expensive number 6 overall guy that you just paid. You created a conundrum that got you to where you are today, because the psychology of Carson Wentz, in my opinion, wasn't as strong as it needed to be, whether you're talking about Nick Foles or the drafting of Jalen Hurts. Let's go over to the wide receiver side, Derek Gunn. The Eagles have drafted 10 wide receivers in the last 4 or 5 drafts. Okay, 10 wide receivers. But everybody wants the kid out of Alabama. My thing is, listen, these guys that they have on the roster, they might not necessarily have the talent level, of some of these top wide receivers. But to me, it comes down to your ability to develop these guys. 10 wide receivers, that's a lot of wide receivers. That tells me that you don't have a clue what the heck you're doing at drafting wide receivers. Then at the other end of the spectrum are these guys that bad, or are they not being developed? They're not being coached the way that they need to be coached, that they haven't found the right coach, because I believe under Doug's tenure, they hired 4 wide receiver coaches, over a 5-year span, So we can talk about the quarterback, we can talk about the wide receiver, but if you're not doing all the right things, you've created a situation for yourself. If the quarterback is still learning, the wide receiver's young, he's trying to learn the offense and learn routes. You got a quarterback, situation with a bunch of young quarterbacks. And, what if your young guy wins the job? What does that say for Jalen Hurts? What if the veteran wins the job? And now you got 2 young guys. I think you create too many variables, in my opinion, for such a young football team, because, if you draft a quarterback with number 6, it's not like he's going to pay dividends this year. He's going to take time to develop, and you need to put all the pieces around him first in order to get to a point where he can begin to take off. And if you've not done your homework in the proper way, and this guy is fragile mentally in any way, and you put him out there, we've heard that saying before, hey, you could ruin the guy. So these are the reasons why I'm more in favor of trading out of the spot and not taking a wide receiver or a quarterback at number 6.
When I look at the current wide receiver situation, I think it's a situation where they could get by for one more year. I want to see another year of Quez Watkins, John Hightower, Greg Ward, Jalen Reagor. I want to see what they can do with a new set of coaches who hopefully can coach them up to play a lot better. Now that they all have their feet wet in the National Football League and know what it takes to succeed, we already know what Greg Ward is. Greg Ward is a slot receiver, hands down. And I think he's very capable of being that slot receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, like a Golden Tate type receiver. When you talk about taking a kid from Alabama at number 6, the first thing that comes to mind is, number one, electric, but number two, fragile. See, we've seen a lot of these guys dominate at the collegiate level because they're playing inferior competition. When you get to the National Football League, even when you play a team that's considered inferior in the one-loss column, you're still playing grown men who are talented and very skilled at what they do. And I wonder what this kid's durability is. You're going to put some weight on this kid. He can't just fly by. I mean, I don't want to see another Deshaun Jackson, okay? I mean, great success early on, but does he become damaged goods down the road? He's a wispy type guy in terms of physical stature. If I'm looking to stay at number 6, I need an impact player who's going to be there beyond his rookie contract. I'm looking at a linebacker. I'm looking at a cornerback. Somebody you can build a foundation around. Now, Jeff was talking about the quarterback situation. Let's say they find a quarterback that they really like. Well, as we've seen in recent years, a quarterback can come in and play a lot sooner. I mean, you look at a kid like Justin Herbert who got in out of necessity, and look at what he was capable of doing. So these quarterbacks can play quicker and better at a much younger age than quarterbacks we're accustomed to seeing in years gone by. But I'm not against, number one, I'm not against them moving down if they can get a second first-round pick. But also, if they stay in that hole, I want to see them get a player who's going to be there for 16 games potentially, whether it's a wide receiver, a linebacker, a cornerback. And everybody's on board with this wide receiver from Alabama. I love the kid. I love everything about him. But I'm just not sold on him because of his physical stature.
Jeff, I love to watch press conferences because there's always that information between the lines of us who've been around the game long enough to kind of decipher. Fans do not like to hear the word rebuild, and therefore you never hear a GM or owner use that word. But they use words like transition. They use words like, we're moving into a different phase or a different focus. But really what they're saying is we're in a rebuild mode. So Jeffrey Lurie, quote, Doug Peterson wasn't on board with a 2, 3, 4, 5-year plan. Okay. That's telling me that year one, next year, they know they're going to be bad. They know that the wheels have come off. Now, why is that the case? And people can talk about what Howie has done, and there's some validity there. We can talk about the injuries. There's a lot of validity there. We can talk about the lack of Carson's ability to really step into, once again, his talent and his abilities. But at the end of the day, the Philadelphia Eagles, their 5-year window for the Super Bowl has now shut closed. Everything that they've done since the time that they drafted Carson Wentz was to put them in a position to chase Super Bowls. I think they caught lightning in the ball in 2017. We're fortunate to have a guy like Nick Foles on the roster to finish the deal, although I do believe that Carson was playing so well at that time that he probably would have finished the deal himself that year. But what they've done is that they have mortgaged the salary cap, and they've been way too loyal to older players, and they find themselves in this position now where it's a rebuild. So speak to that. Speak to, what our fans can expect next year, because I think next year, maybe even in the 22, that the Eagles are going to be really, really non-competitive, even in a weak division like the NFC East.
Yeah, obviously I was going to say about the NFC East, if there's a division that you can compete in, especially even as you're rebuilding or transitioning, it's the NFC East. That being said, in the NFL, and Seth and Barry, as well as anybody, especially now in the salary cap era, you can turn things around relatively quick. Now, look, I do agree that the Eagles have a lot to change here. I mean, you could argue, save for like maybe a handful of guys like Dallas Goedert and Miles Sanders and a few others, obviously Jalen Reagor, the guys that you just drafted, that you could turn over almost the entire roster. There's an argument that could be made that guys like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Jason Kelsey, and I think we all agree that Zach Ertz is probably going to be traded this offseason, that guys that have been foundational pieces for this team for many, many years, they could be gone this year, or you could argue that they should be gone this year. And that in itself is kind of scary. And when you look at it, that you're asking Howie Roseman to kind of completely turn over this team in not just 1 year, but I think this is obviously going to be a 1 or 2 year process. But you look at every position, and I think there's not many guys that you can argue, say, okay, we got to have him back. This is a young developmental guy, a young guy that's already developing that we think that we can build around. There aren't many of those guys. And I think that's why it's going to take a little bit of some time. Again, as you mentioned, the salary cap issue, the cap is not great. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some people say. They're going to be able to trim a lot of fat, as we see over these next few weeks as they've released some players. They've already started, obviously, with Deshaun Jackson. Getting rid of Carson Wentz does help that. Of course, there's a dead cap hit, but it does provide some cap relief this year. The cap is not going to be going up a very large amount because of the pandemic, but you can obviously restructure some of these contracts. You don't want to keep borrowing from the future. That's what kind of got them in this issue in the first place. Howie gave out some very bad contracts, Alshon Jeffrey being one of them. Again, argument could be made that the Fletcher Cox contract wasn't a very good one, because now you're starting to see a descending player making by far the most on the team, and obviously among other defensive tackles, one of the most at his position. So it's going to be a process here. But the good news is that the NFC East is not strong. You don't have great quarterback situations there. Even with Dak Prescott coming back, you're not really sure about him. And then again, I think in the NFL, because of the schedules and how they changed it, there is an opportunity here for the Eagles to be competitive and turn it around as long as they make the right choices, a few minor signings in free agency, and start hitting on these draft picks.
Ray, let's take a look at the coaching staff. We've got an extremely young staff. Okay, we've got a 39-year-old head coach. We got a defensive coordinator, respectively 37 and 35 years old. I was floored when I saw that the linebackers coach is 27 years old. Okay, there are players on the team that are older than him, 27 years old. So obviously, the Eagles are in a youth movement, not only from the perspective, of the players, but from the perspective of the coaches. How do these Philadelphia Eagles become competitive again with players that are going to be learning on the fly, along with coaches who are going to be learning on the fly? Nick Sirianni has never been a head coach. The pressure of being in game type situations where you're the guy that's counted on to make the decisions. Steichen has only called offensive plays one season. And then Cannon, I believe it is, or Gannon, he's never called defensive calls before. How does this possibly work out? And what on God's earth was the Philadelphia Eagles brass thinking about when they allowed these coaches, to become position coaches on this roster?
Good question. I was wondering the same thing myself.
I knew you were.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this. I mean, you have an old roster, you have old players, and you have players that are too old and coaches that are too young. How's that supposed to work? Tell me. I don't get it. And the other thing in the same regard, I mean, the whole coaching staff pretty much got blown up. I mean, Jeff Stoutland comes back on the offensive line. That's a positive to me. I think he's a really good offensive line coach. But one of the coaches you retain is Aaron Moorhead, the wide receiver coach. What position on this team underachieved more grotesquely than the wide receivers? But you kept your wide receiver coach? Hello? I mean, what am I missing here? When they started cleaning out the coaching staff, I thought, well, okay, they'll certainly change the wide receiver coach. They do that every year, except this year when the guy absolutely should have been fired. I don't get it. And you bring in a kid like Sirianni, never been a head coach. You put him in this situation with a clearly, whether they want to use the term or not, rebuilding team. Put all that responsibility on his shoulders in a town like Philadelphia, which is really tough. I mean, somewhere along the line, he needs a couple of old heads. He needs a couple of veterans to kind of lean on that can kind of see him through the process. They gave him nothing. I mean, they gave him guys that are just as new to their jobs as he is to his. I think it's a real concern. I will go on the record as saying, and I feel like I should go on the record as saying, Seth, I actually put your name in candidacy to be the linebacker coach. I went very, very public with that on more than one occasion. I lobbied strongly for you to be the new linebacker coach, and not just because we're friends, and not because I don't want to work with you, because I do, but I feel, number one, I think you should be coaching in this league. I really think you should, and I think you'd be really good at it. And number two, I think you would have been a great fit for this team. So I went on record as saying that. I'm sorry it didn't happen. But to your point, the composition of this coaching staff matched up with the kind of team that they're going to be working with and the challenge that they face, I think I share all of your concerns. I really do. Just to follow up on one point about what to do at number 6, I would not be so quick to trade out of 6. I wouldn't. I understand the temptation of moving down, getting additional picks, but I would try and stay at 6, and I wouldn't be taking a quarterback. I really wouldn't. I think Jeff is right. I think that option is open. I think it's on the table. I think they're having that discussion. I really do believe that. I wouldn't do it. I want to see what Jalen Hurts can do. I agree with you, Seth. Let's go with him. Bring in a veteran backup that can kind of mentor and be the backup guy. But I think for where this team is right now, I want to spend this season finding out if Jalen Hurts can really play. And if you bring in a Zach Wilson or one of those guys, you want to bring in Trevor Lawrence, that's a different conversation. But you can't get him. And as far as that next tier of quarterbacks here, Wilson, Fields, those guys, to me, they're all maybes. And I don't want to use the number 6 on a maybe.
Yep.
Maybe a cornerback like Patrick Surtain, because I don't know, Jeff was talking about what they might have to do in terms of cutting salary on the salary cap. I'm not so sure Darius Slay comes back, to be honest with you. I mean, you might not have a single cornerback on this roster. So Patrick Surtain to me seems like a plug and play kind of player. If he was there at 6, I think it'd be worth staying at 6 and taking him.
All right, gentlemen, last question. Okay. What's your confidence level in Nick Sirianni? There's a lot of people that believe that the Philadelphia Eagles in 2 to 3 years will be right back here at this crossroads once again, looking for a new head coach and hiring a new staff. I'll start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go there. I don't think that's fair to Nick. And, I know that he struggled in his initial press conference and that turned off a lot of fans. But, that's not going to matter ultimately when he gets into a room of players and coaches and, talks to them about going out there and being a winning team. I think that's just kind of a small facet of it. And yes, I think it certainly plays to and makes you question Jeff's statement that he won. He was the best, most impressive guy that they had interviewed during the whole process. I don't necessarily believe that. But that being said, Frank Reich apparently stood on the table for him. And I think that played a lot to Jeffrey and factored a lot into his reason for hiring. Now, I've talked to, guys like Todd Haley who've been in the league and were basically the guy who gave Nick his first chance, who really talked him up and say that Nick has a lot of the intangibles that you want out of a head coach. The question I had, though, with Nick is that there were no other teams that interviewed him. Now, that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be a good head coach. No one else interviewed Doug Peterson in 2016. No one else interviewed Andy Reid in 1999. But that being said, I think a lot of teams viewed Nick as a guy perhaps down the road that could be a head coach, that he still had to do a bunch of things, had to check off a bunch of boxes before he could get to that point. He's never called plays in a game. I don't think that necessarily means he won't be able to do it once he becomes the head coach. But just so many unanswered questions about him. And yes, I have a lot of questions about the staff he put together. Like you, Ray, I was surprised that they didn't hire some sort of guy with past head coaching experience to be there alongside him and help him along. A lot of questionable decisions that they made. And certainly when you look at the Howie Roseman dynamic, was this a guy that they brought in just because he's not going to step on his toes in personnel and you wonder if that's really what this team's need, if that's what this Eagles team needs going forward.
Jeff, I agree with you. I'm in the camp of giving this guy, the benefit of the doubt, the chance. But to your point, if there's an ugly girl at a party and ain't nobody asking her to dance, I'm not going over to ask her to dance. You can best believe that. Barrett, your thoughts?
I just think, we at least got to give him a chance. I mean, he's a younger coach. He might understand how to coach these younger players. I mean, these guys are different. And considering the fact that we're in a pandemic still, and they won't be as much of a way to, kind of influence his culture, it's going to be hard for this coaching staff to come in and win the hearts of their players and get them going in the right direction. Until they meet face to face and everybody's in there and they can really feel each other out and feel the coaching staff out, I got to give him the benefit of the doubt and saying this. If he's young, he get these young guys going, there's a youth movement going on, then he might be able to woo these guys and get them pointed in the right direction. I just hope that he goes out there and keeps that spirit that he had out there that I saw with a couple of clips I did see him in Indianapolis. If they can come up with that youthful enthusiasm and it doesn't seem fake, I think the older guys will start to turn around also. But it's going to be really, really tough doing this stuff over Zoom for the next couple of months and then having them go into camp and, have these guys learn a culture that they haven't even seen before. So it's going to be a tough situation for these guys. I'm looking forward to seeing it, though. I want to see what direction this culture goes with this young coaching staff.
D-Gun.
Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson. 3 guys who had no head coaching experience in the National Football League. 3 guys that had success coaching in the National Football League as a head coach. You got to give Nick a chance. I'm just shocked at the volume of people out there that were negative towards the hiring of Nick Sirianni when it was announced. When you look at a league that has been trending towards younger coaches, you look at Sean McVays, the Matt LaFleur's, the Cliff Kingsbury's, and this is the trend. These young, innovative minds. Frank Reich endorses this guy, says he was my right-hand man every week game planning and had an integral part of designing the offensive game flow week in and week out. If that is the case, I'm excited to see, I don't care who's in uniform for the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm excited to see what kind of creativity that was lacking in 2020 that Nick Sirianni can inject into this offense in 2021. How does he keep the defense on his heels? How does he move his pieces around? And I do think you have enough young talent that you can do some damage. Now, I honestly believe they're going to lose more games than they win in 2020. But as we all know, you don't have to wait 5-6 years anymore to turn it around and become a competitor again. It's a quick fix. My biggest concern is the guy who's orchestrating the quick fix in Howie Roseman. I don't trust Howie Roseman to build this team in the right way. If Howie Roseman would step back and let some other qualified people take the reins and try to build this team, I would feel a little bit better about it. I don't want Howie making the final decisions. Okay? I've seen enough of that. It's been too inconsistent in the past. I want to see somebody else, whether it's Andy Weidel or somebody, say, okay, this is who we need to take for this position to build this team in the right way. If that happens, I feel better about this team moving forward.
Ray, I'm going to give you the last word, but I just want to, touch on something that Derek just talked about, this youth movement. I've been around football a long time, the same way a lot of you guys have been around football a long time. There is this movement towards, these younger coaches who are supposed to be these new great innovators of the game. Let me tell you something about innovation. Back in my day, you had the K gun, you had the run and shoot, you had the red gun. Okay. In my opinion, that's what these offenses are. You've just transitioned from third down offenses just being on the field in third down situations to those offenses being on the field on first, second, third, and sometimes fourth down. So there's nothing new under the sun. Everybody thought Chip Kelly was going to come in here and transform the NFL. And in 3 years' time, every defensive coordinator in the league figured out what he had on that little 6x4 sheet, and his offense was all of a sudden obsolete. So in my opinion, these young coaches aren't going to bring anything new. How's it working for Cliff Kingsbury after 2 years? How's it working for Sean McVay? They had to transform their entire offense last year and now trade away the number 1 pick in the draft in order to try to figure out how to make this new innovative offense actually work. So I'm not so sure. I think in football, sometimes, it's a copycat league. Everybody sees the new shiny thing and they want to gravitate towards it. But in time, things always revert back to what it is. When you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, yeah, they threw the ball, but go back and look at how much they ran the football. Go back to the ground and pound of our day, Ray, and what it used to look like and how it makes your quarterback a much more efficient passer. Okay,
Cleveland.
So you can talk about the innovative minds, but what I've seen is that every one of these innovative minded coaches, you give them 3 or 4 years, defenses always catch up, especially a defense who has the capability of rushing the quarterback. Whoever thought that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was going to hold Patrick Mahomes and that vaunted offense to 9 points, 3 field goals? Defenses will catch up under the right circumstances. Ray, the godfather of Philadelphia sports, you have the last word.
Well, yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of ground there, Seth. I agree with all of it. You looked at the Super Bowl. I mean, the headline, of course, is Tom Brady, 43 years old, wins a Super Bowl with his new team. But when you go back and look at that game, they won that game with defense. They won that game with pass rush, and they won it with a heavy dose of Leonard Fournette running the football. I agree with you. Football doesn't change all that much. They change the names of the formations. They gussy them up a little bit here and there. But it still comes down to execution, blocking, and tackling. So I agree with that. As far as what we were talking about, the composition of the coaching staff, yeah, I agree. I'm okay with a young coach. We've seen young coaches coming in. That is the wave of the NFL now. But generally, he has an older lieutenant. I mean, when Sean McVay was hired, 31 years old, but he had Wade Phillips with him, a guy that had been around the block 100 times to lean on. You don't have that here. I agree with what the guys said in terms of I think you have to give Nick Sirianni the benefit of the doubt. I mean, one thing about Jeffrey Lurie's ownership, the coaches he's hired, there hasn't been a whiff in the bunch, really. I mean, starting with Ray Rhodes, and then you go to Andy, and then you go to Chip, and then you go to Doug. They've all had success. I mean, Ray was coach of the year his first year. Andy's the winningest coach in the history of the franchise. Chip, for whatever else you want to say about Chip, the only coach in the history of the franchise that won the division in his first year, and Doug won you a Super Bowl. So every time that Jeff Lurie has gone out, they've all been the same kind of guy. They've all been never before head coaches. They've all been first-time NFL head coaches. He goes that way. That's why I never thought Josh McDaniel was really a factor. I mean, I thought it was going to be a new guy, and it was. But every time Jeff has hired one of these guys, they've had some success. They've had some degree of success. And I think so on that basis, you kind of got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Everybody that I have talked to about Nick Sirianni and everybody I've communicated with, either on the phone or by email, asking about him, I have not heard a single discouraging word. I mean, everybody really likes him. They say he's tremendously energetic. He's real bright. I heard the same thing that the Frank Reich said, that he was my right-hand guy. I mean, he sat with me. We did the game plans together. Recommended him, could not have recommended him more highly. The one qualifier that I have heard, and I've heard it from just about everybody, is I just wonder if at the age of 39, if he's ready. I mean, I don't think anybody doubted that he had the potential to be a really good head coach. They're just wondering if the time and the situation is right for him. But based on Jeff's record of hiring coaches, I think we got to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Good stuff, guys. Good stuff. Hey, listen, I appreciate you guys' time. A little bit of house cleaning before we get out of here. We do the giveaways every once in a while. We got an autographed Eagles football and an autographed Eagles mini helmet. The winner of this week's giveaway is on Twitter, CG at CFGIBS on Twitter. Congratulations, my friend. I will follow you. I'll DM you, and also send me over your information so I can get your winnings to you. Congratulations. Again, follow me over on Twitter at Seth Joyner. Follow me over on Instagram at Seth Joyner Show, on YouTube at Seth Joyner Show, because we'll continue to give out giveaways. We got some other exciting stuff coming down the road. Again, I want to thank my guests, Ray Didinger, Jeff McClain, Barrett Brooks, Derek Gunn. I always end my show, gentlemen, with the saying that time is our most valuable commodity. I thank you guys for spending the last hour and 15 minutes with me. I know from my comments that my viewers love the show. Again, thank you for your time. And as this thing winds down, I want to make sure that I have you guys coming back because, you guys are the heart and soul in a lot of ways of what's going on in the city of Philadelphia as far as our Eagles are concerned. So thank you. Thank you for your time. As always, be good to each other and take care of each other. But most importantly, guys, make sure that you love each other. Peace. I'll see you right back here next week.
Thanks, Seth.
Thanks.
Thanks,
All
Seth.
right. Appreciate it.